My life was quiet, maybe even a little predictable. It revolved around two things: my garden and my Sunday morning calls with my son, Stephen. I believed I had a good relationship with his wife, Isabel. I truly thought she cared for me. I was wrong. For Mother's Day, she offered me a special gift: a trip down memory lane. But that trip ended with her abandoning me at a deserted train station, all to prove to my son that I was losing my mind. She expected to return a week later and find a broken, confused old woman. What she didn't expect was who would be standing right next to me when she arrived, power of attorney papers in hand. This is the story of how that perfect gift turned into the perfect revenge. Follow along to see how it all unfolds. Don't forget to subscribe, give this story a like if you're ready for the drama, and comment below what you would have done in my situation. The phone rang at precisely 10:05 a.m., just as it had every Sunday for the last 15 years. I'd assigned a special ringtone to my son, Stephen, a cheerful, upbeat marimba tune that always made me smile. I picked up before the second chime. "There's my favorite librarian," Stephen's voice boomed, warm and familiar. I could picture him perfectly, probably sitting at his kitchen island in that sleek, modern house of his, a half-empty mug of coffee steaming beside him. "And there's my favorite architect," I replied, settling into my worn armchair. "Are you designing any magnificent skyscrapers this week, or just vexing your contractors?" He chuckled, a sound that was pure comfort. "A little of both. The plumbing subcontractor on the new office building is giving me a headache, but what else is new? How are things on your end? Did you get that leaky faucet fixed?" We fell into the easy rhythm of our weekly catch-up. I told him about the plumber who overcharged me, the new mystery novel I was engrossed in, and the stubborn weeds taking over my petunia bed. He told me about a presentation he'd nailed, a movie he and Isabel had watched, and his ongoing frustration with the city's zoning board. It was the simple geography of his voice, the mapping of his week, that I cherished. It made the 600 miles between my quiet New Jersey home and his bustling life in Chicago feel like nothing. I had poured every ounce of my being into raising that boy after his father passed. My life had been a constellation with him as the unmoving North Star. Now, at 42, he was a success, confident, kind, and happily married. My work was done, and I was deeply, profoundly proud. "Isabel sends her love, by the way," he said as we were winding down. "She's been busy with the boutique but said to give you a big hug for her." "That's sweet of her," I said, and I meant it. "Give her my love, too." We said our goodbyes, promising to talk again soon. I hung up the phone feeling the way I always did after our calls, anchored, loved, and secure in my small, peaceful world. That security always felt a little less stable whenever Isabel was around. A week later, she and Stephen were back in town for a weekend, and the three of us were having dinner at a nice Italian place downtown. Isabel was, as always, impeccable. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and smelled faintly of jasmine and money. Her blonde hair was styled in a chic, effortless bob, and her smile was dazzling. But I'd learned that her smile never quite reached her eyes. They were cool, calculating blue, constantly assessing, constantly cataloging. "Oh, Carol, I just love your little house," she'd said when they picked me up earlier. "It's so quaint, full of vintage charm." It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like she was describing an exhibit at a museum. Now, at the restaurant, she rested a perfectly manicured hand on Stephen's forearm as I told a story about his first-grade school play. "You must have been so proud," she said, her voice smooth as cream. But as I continued, I saw her subtly redirect the conversation, asking Stephen a pointed question about his work, pulling his attention away from the past and back to the present she now dominated. I felt a familiar prickle of unease. It was a sensation I'd had many times around her, a feeling of being gently, almost invisibly, erased. There were the lost family photo albums that went missing after I'd lent them to her, the stories of mine she'd retell as if they were her own witty observations, the way she'd finish my sentences with a slightly different, less intelligent ending. Stephen, blissfully unaware, beamed at his wife. He saw a charming, engaging woman making an effort with his old mother. I saw a master puppeteer, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my son and I were the puppets. I pushed the thought away, blaming my own insecurities. I was just an old woman set in her ways. Isabel was the modern, successful woman my son deserved. I tried to see her through his eyes. I really did. After we'd finished our tiramisu, Isabel set down her fork and clapped her hands together lightly. Her diamonds flashed in the candlelight. "Well, since we're all here and Mother's Day is just around the corner," she began, her smile wide and bright. "I wanted to announce my gift for you a little early, Carol." Stephen looked at her, surprised and pleased. "Oh yeah. It's a secret, and it's just for you and me," Isabel continued, her gaze fixed on me. "I was listening when you talked about growing up, the places you used to go. So I've planned a special trip for us. A trip down memory lane. I'm going to take you to a place you haven't seen in years. A place that was really important to you as a girl." I felt my own smile falter. "Oh, Isabel, you don't have to do that." "Nonsense. I want to," she insisted. "It'll be our special girls' day out. It's all arranged." Stephen's face was lit with pure joy. "Isabel, that's incredible. Mom, isn't that the most thoughtful thing you've ever heard?" His happiness was a tangible force, a wave of warmth and expectation that pinned me to my seat. How could I refuse? How could I say that the thought of a secret trip with Isabel filled me with a quiet, inexplicable dread? It would break his heart. He would see it as a rejection of his wife, of her kindness. "It's wonderful," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "Thank you, Isabel. That's very thoughtful." She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her skin was cool. "It's going to be perfect," she promised. "You'll see." I swallowed my doubt along with the last of my dessert, feeling the chill of her touch long after she'd pulled her hand away. The day of the surprise arrived, gray and overcast. Isabel picked me up in her sleek black sedan. As we merged onto the Garden State Parkway, heading north into the less developed parts of the state, she started her gentle interrogation. "Are you sure you're feeling okay, Carol?" she asked, glancing over from the driver's seat. "You seem a little tired today. Did you sleep well?" "I slept fine, dear. I'm just enjoying the drive," I said, though my stomach was in a tight knot. An hour later, she tried a different angle. "You know, it's funny," she mused. "You told me that story about your first boyfriend last week when we were on the phone. Don't you remember?" I frowned. I hadn't spoken to her on the phone all week. "No, I don't think I did." She gave a little tinkling laugh. "Oh, Carol, your memory. Honestly, sometimes I think it's better than mine and other times." She let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished and damning. I felt a flush of defensive anger, but I pushed it down. Getting upset was what she wanted. I stared out the window at the blur of green, the dense pine trees crowding the highway. We drove on, the silence broken only by her occasional, targeted questions. She asked if I'd remembered to cancel a doctor's appointment I never had. She wondered aloud if I'd taken my blood pressure medication that morning, even though she knew I wasn't on any. With every mile I felt smaller, more confused. Was I becoming forgetful? She was so confident, so sure. The car felt like a cage, and the woman beside me was the smiling, patient zookeeper, gently prodding her confused animal. I was losing my footing, the solid ground of my own mind turning to sand beneath me. After nearly 2 hours, Isabel turned off the parkway and onto a series of increasingly neglected roads. Finally, she pulled to a stop where the cracked asphalt met a field of weeds. Before us stood the skeletal remains of a train station. The roof sagged, paint peeled from the clabbered walls like sunburnt skin, and the empty window frames looked like shattered eyes. A rusted sign creaked in the wind, its letters long since vanished. "Here we are," Isabel announced into the sudden silence. I stared at the ruin. "What is this place?" "Your gift," she said. Her voice had lost its sweetness. She turned off the engine, and the change was startling. The mask of a loving daughter-in-law didn't just slip, It evaporated. She turned to face me, her blue eyes as cold and hard as marbles. "This is a test, Carol. Steven's worried you're losing your mind. He's been worried for months. He thinks you're getting senile, that you're a danger to yourself." I told him I'd check. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Steven wouldn't. "Wouldn't he?" she interrupted, her voice flat. "He loves you. He's concerned. I'm just confirming his fears." She got out of the car, her movements brisk and efficient. She didn't look back. The driver's side door slammed shut, a sound as final as a gunshot. The engine roared to life. I watched, paralyzed, as the car made a three-point turn on the crumbling pavement. The crunch of gravel under the tires was the last thing I heard before the red taillights disappeared down the road, leaving me in the oppressive silence of the pines. A cold wind whipped around the corner of the station, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and decay. I was alone. For a long time I just stood there, my feet rooted to the crumbling asphalt. The only sound was the wind sighing through the pines and the frantic, useless beating of my own heart. Shock is a cold, heavy blanket. It smothers thought, leaving only a dull, buzzing disbelief. This wasn't real. Any moment now, Isabel would drive back, laughing at her cruel joke. But the minutes stretched into an hour, and the gray sky began to bleed into a bruised purple. Temperature dropped. The wind grew teeth. Reality set in, sharp and brutal. This was no joke. Fear, raw and primal, finally pierced the shock. I was a 68-year-old woman, alone in the middle of nowhere, with no food, no water, and a dying cell phone that had lost its signal miles ago. Panic was a wild animal clawing at the inside of my chest, and I had to fight it down. I would not die out here. I would not give Isabel the satisfaction of being right. My gaze fell on the dilapidated station. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. I forced my trembling legs to move, picking my way through the weeds to the boarded-up entrance. One of the boards was loose. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I pried it away until I could slip through the gap. Inside, it smelled of rotten rain. Dust motes danced in the fading light that filtered through the grimy windows. I found what must have been the station agent's office, a small room with a decaying desk and a single, overturned chair. I pulled my thin cardigan tighter around me, sat on the floor with my back against the wall, and prepared for the longest night of my life. I wouldn't just survive, I would plan. The librarian in me, the one who organized thoughts and narratives for a living, took over. Every cruel comment, every misplaced item, every saccharine smile from Isabel, I began to catalog them all, turning my fear into a cold, hard stone of anger in my gut. Dawn came not as a comfort, but as a call to action. The gray light revealed the full extent of the decay around me, but it also illuminated a path forward. The rusted train tracks, stretching away into the dense woods. Tracks, I reasoned, had to lead somewhere. My body ached with a deep, chilling cold, and my throat was parched. But the anger I'd nurtured through the night had burned away the last vestiges of fear. The frail, confused old woman Isabel had tried to create was gone. In her place was someone I hadn't met in years. The young widow who had raised a son on her own, the woman who had faced down grief and hardship and won. I started walking, following the path of the tracks. The wooden ties were uneven, and the ballast stones shifted under my sensible shoes. Every step was an effort, but every step was also an act of defiance. The sun rose higher, and the woods around me came alive with the sound of birds who were oblivious to my plight. I thought of Steven. The pain of Isabel's betrayal was sharp, but the thought that my son might believe her, that he might truly think I was losing my mind, was a deeper, more profound agony. He has to see the truth, I thought, the words becoming a rhythm for my steps. He will see the truth. After what felt like an eternity, hours of forcing one foot in front of the other, I heard it. A low, distant hum. It grew steadily louder, resolving into the sound of traffic. I pushed through a thicket of overgrown bushes, my cardigan snagging on thorns, and stumbled out onto the shoulder of a two-lane county road. I had never been so happy to see cracked asphalt in my life. I stood by the side of the road, a disheveled old woman with leaves in her hair and a wild look in her eye. Half a dozen cars sped past, their drivers barely glancing at me. I began to feel a sliver of despair. Then, an old, slightly battered Ford pickup truck slowed and pulled over onto the gravel shoulder ahead of me. The driver's side window rolled down. A man in his late 60s with a weathered face, a bristly gray mustache, and sharp, intelligent eyes leaned over. He wore a faded flannel shirt and a cautious expression. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Tears of relief pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back fiercely. I would not look hysterical. I walked to his window, my legs unsteady. "My daughter-in-law left me here," I said, my voice hoarse but clear. "She drove me out to an abandoned station in the woods and left me there." The man's eyes narrowed. It was the kind of look that saw more than you wanted it to. I recognized it from my years as a librarian dealing with teenagers trying to pull a fast one. It was a look that demanded the truth. He was a human lie detector. "That's a mighty strange story," he said slowly, his gaze sweeping over me, taking in my sensible shoes, my library card still tucked in my pocket, the determined, furious set of my jaw. "It's a mighty strange situation," I retorted. "She was trying to prove I was senile. She told me it was a Mother's Day gift." He was silent for a long moment, just looking at me. I met his gaze without flinching. I had nothing left to lose but the truth. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. He nodded once, a sharp, definitive gesture. "My name is Frank Miller," he said. "I used to be a state trooper. Get in. You look like you could use a cup of coffee." Frank took me to a small, clean diner a few miles down the road. The smell of coffee and frying bacon was the most wonderful thing I'd ever experienced. After I'd downed a full glass of water and the waitress had set a steaming mug in front of me, Frank leaned forward. "All right," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Start from the beginning. And don't leave anything out." And so I told him. I told him everything. Not just about being left at the station, but about the months leading up to it. The misplaced heirlooms that would turn up in odd places. The forgotten appointments. The constant subtle gaslighting. The story poured out of me, a flood of incidents that had seemed small and disconnected in isolation but, when woven together, formed a tapestry of calculated cruelty. Frank listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt. When I finally fell silent, exhausted, he took a slow sip of his own coffee. "Power of attorney," he said, and blinked. "What?" "The end game," he clarified, setting his mug down with a soft click. "This isn't just about proving you're confused. This is about getting control of your finances, your house, your medical decisions. She's not trying to get you help. She's trying to get you out of the way. She'll spend this week telling your son and anyone else who will listen that you had a psychotic break. She'll get a doctor to sign off, a lawyer to draw up the papers. By the time she comes back for you, and she will come back, she'll expect to find a broken woman ready for a nursing home, leaving her with everything." Hearing my own vague fears articulated so clearly, so clinically, was horrifying. He saw the entire chessboard, while I had only been looking at the last move. It was all true. And the worst part was, it was a brilliant, vicious plan that might actually work. A wave of helplessness washed over me, so powerful it almost made me slump in the booth. What could I do? It was my word against Isabel's. She was the smart, successful, charming one. I was the confused old mother she'd found wandering in the woods. Frank seemed to read my mind. "You can't fight this alone, Carol. And you can't just go home. You need a weapon." A weapon? My mind raced. The police. It was still a family matter, murky and hard to prove. A doctor. Isabel had already poisoned that well. Then a name and a face surfaced from my memory. My sister's daughter, Clara. A girl I hadn't seen in nearly 5 years, not since my sister's funeral. She'd been a quiet, intense law student then. Now she was a corporate lawyer in Philadelphia. A bulldog, my sister had always called her. "I think I have one," I said, my voice finding a new strength. "Frank, may I borrow your phone?" He pushed his cell across the table. I found Clara's number in my contacts and pressed call, my heart pounding. She answered on the second ring, her voice as crisp and professional as I remembered. "Aunt Carol," she said, surprise evident in her tone. "Clara, I'm in trouble. I need your help," I began. I told her the entire story, a more condensed but no less urgent version of the one I'd told Frank. I heard her typing softly in the background. She didn't interrupt with platitudes or disbelief, only with sharp, clarifying questions. "What was the exact date she claimed you missed the appointment? Does she have access to your bank accounts? What is her maiden name?" When I finished, there was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Aunt Carol," she said finally, and her voice was no longer just professional. It was cold, hard steel. "Listen to me very carefully. Do not call Stephen. Do not go home. Stay with Frank. I'm clearing my schedule. I'm on my way." The next 7 days were the strangest of my life. I was a fugitive hiding in plain sight. Frank and his warm, sensible wife, Mary, treated me like a visiting relative. They gave me a comfortable guest room, fed me, and mostly left me to the quiet hum of my own thoughts and the clipped, strategic phone calls with my niece. The day after my rescue, Clara arrived. She was exactly as I remembered, only more so. Sharp, focused, with an air of controlled intensity that seemed to suck all the excess oxygen out of a room. We sat at Frank and Mary's kitchen table, a steaming pot of coffee between us, and mapped out the enemy's campaign. "Right now," Clara began, her pen tapping a rhythm on a yellow legal pad, "she's giving the performance of a lifetime." I closed my eyes, and with Clara's prompting, I could picture it perfectly. I saw Isabel rushing into my own home, her face a mask of frantic worry. I saw her weeping, clutching Stephen's arm as she told him the story she'd spent weeks rehearsing. "I don't know what happened, Stephen." I could almost hear her voice, expertly breaking with emotion. "We were having a lovely day, and she just got confused, agitated. She started talking about things that made no sense and wandered off. I looked for her for hours. I had to call the police. She would paint a picture of my sudden, tragic breakdown. She would be the hero of the story, the devoted daughter-in-law, trying desperately to manage an impossible situation. And my son, my loving, trusting son, would believe her. He would be sick with worry, and he would lean on his strong, capable wife. That was the cornerstone of her plan, to isolate him in his grief and become his only source of information. The hardest part of the plan was the silence. Every cell in my body screamed to call Stephen, to hear his voice, to shout, "I'm here. I'm safe. Your wife is a monster." "We can't," Clara said, her voice firm but not unkind. We were on our 3rd day at Frank's house, and the inactivity was fraying my nerves. "Think it through, Aunt Carol. If you call him, he'll be relieved, but then he'll immediately call her. The second Isabel knows you're safe and, more importantly, that you have a lawyer, the game changes. She'll pivot." I looked at her, confused. "Pivot how?" "She'll say we kidnapped you. She'll say I'm a money-grubbing relative who is manipulating a confused old woman to get her estate. She will twist it, and it will become a messy, drawn-out battle of he said, she said. Right now, she's operating with confidence. She thinks you're a pawn to be collected. We need her to walk into the trap believing she's already one." Her logic was flawless, and I hated it. Not being able to speak to my son was a unique kind of hell. I felt like I was mourning a relationship that wasn't even over, watching from a distance as she poisoned the well of his love for me, drop by calculated drop. Every hour that passed was another hour she had to cement her lies, to shape his reality. All I could do was trust in Clara's strategy and wait. Clara's strategy, it turned out, was not passive. She'd hired a private investigator, a former Philly cop who moved with quiet efficiency. The daily updates he fed Clara painted a chilling picture of Isabel's meticulous work. On Monday, she had a tearful phone call with my primary care physician, Dr. Evans, detailing my frightening cognitive decline and recent episodes of paranoia. On Tuesday, she had a locksmith come to my house to change the locks, telling the concerned neighbor who inquired that I had lost my keys again, and she was worried about me wandering out. On Wednesday, the investigator's report included photos. Isabel carrying a box of my things out of the house. She was finding the evidence she needed. A book I'd supposedly put in the refrigerator, bills I'd supposedly forgotten to pay, nonsensical notes I'd supposedly written to myself. She was creating a museum of my incompetence, and my own home was the gallery. It was a violation on the deepest level. This woman was walking through my life, picking through my memories, and rewriting my reality with the confidence of an author. With every update from Clara, my grief hardened further into resolve. This was no longer just about what she did to me at the station. It was about the theft of my life, and I was going to make damn sure she didn't get away with it. On Friday morning the call came. I was sitting on Frank's porch, watching the finches at the bird feeder, when Clara came out, her phone pressed to her ear. I knew from the grim set of her jaw that this was it. She listened for a moment longer, said a quiet "thank you," and hung up. "She did it," Clara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Our investigator just confirmed. She met with a lawyer yesterday afternoon. Armed with Dr. Evans's concerned notes and signed affidavits from worried neighbors, she had him draft an immediate, durable power of attorney." Frank, who had joined us on the porch, swore under his breath. "That gives her everything," he said. "Bank accounts, property, medical decisions. The works. Total control," Clara affirmed. The lawyer advised her that, given the circumstances of my disappearance, it would be best to wait a full week before filing it with the court, to show they'd made a good faith effort to find me. A week. The timeline snapped into focus. It was a countdown. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. Instead, a strange, calm clarity settled over me. The waiting was almost over. The trap was built, the bait was laid, and the target was about to make her final move. All we had to do was be there to spring it. Exactly 1 week after she'd left me, the alert came. It was a simple text to Clara's phone from the investigator. "Black sedan is on the move. Northbound on the parkway." "It's time," Clara said, looking up at me. We drove back to the abandoned station, me in the passenger seat of Clara's car, Frank following behind in his truck. As we pulled up to that dreadful, desolate place, I felt not a shred of the fear that had consumed me a week ago. In its place was a cold, crystalline resolve. I closed my eyes and pictured Isabel in her car, speeding up the highway. I imagined the smug satisfaction on her face, the feeling of victory coursing through her. She would be rehearsing her lines, the ones she'd use on the broken, confused woman she expected to find huddled in the ruins. The power of attorney papers would be on the passenger seat beside her, a trophy symbolizing her triumph. She was driving back to the scene of her perfect crime, confident that her plan had worked, that all the loose ends were tied. She was driving toward a problem she thought she had solved. I opened my eyes and stared at the crumbling station. She was about to find something else entirely. We stood in the clearing in front of the station, the three of us. The wind was the same, carrying the same damp, earthy smell of the pine barrens. The derelict building groaned under its weight, a mournful sound of rusting metal and rotting wood. But the place was no longer terrifying. It was a stage. I stood in the center, my back straight, my hands loosely clasped in front of me. To my right stood Clara, a leather briefcase in her hand, her expression as calm and focused as a general before a battle. To my left, standing a respectful few feet away, was Frank. He was silent and watchful, his presence a solid, grounding force. He was not just a witness, he was a guardian. For the first time in a week, my mind was perfectly quiet. There was no fear, no frantic what-ifs, no consuming grief. There was only a profound, solemn sense of purpose. We weren't here for a screaming match or a messy family drama. We were here for the quiet, orderly triumph of the truth. We waited. The wind was the only applause in our theater of justice. A faint hum grew into the purr of a luxury engine. Isabel's black sedan appeared, navigating the bumpy, weed-choked lane with an incongruous elegance. It came to a stop, and the engine cut out, plunging the clearing back into silence. The driver's side door opened, and Isabel emerged. She had dressed for the part of a concerned savior, wearing soft, cream-colored cashmere. Her face was a perfect mask of practiced, pitying concern. She saw me, and her expression softened into one of overwhelming relief. "Oh, Carol! Thank God!" she cried, her voice carrying across the clearing. She rushed toward me, her arms outstretched, ready for an embrace. In her left hand, she clutched a sheaf of papers, folded neatly. "The power of attorney. I've been so worried. I didn't know where you'd gone. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there and watched her come, letting her false words echo and die in the empty space between us. Her steps slowed as she got closer, her smile faltering slightly as she registered my placid expression. She was expecting tears, confusion, maybe even a hug. She was not expecting stillness. Her outstretched arms hesitated, then dropped to her sides. Her gaze flickered from me to the impeccably dressed woman standing at my shoulder. Her words died in her throat. Her face froze. It was a remarkable thing to witness. I watched the series of emotions cascade across her features in a split second. First, confusion. Who was this woman? Then annoyance, an unwelcome intruder spoiling her scene. Then, her eyes registered the sharp, intelligent confidence of my companion, the leather briefcase, and finally, a dawning, horrifying recognition that she had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The hunter had just realized she was the one who had walked into a snare. Clara took one deliberate step forward. "Isabel Peterson?" she asked, and her voice cut through the air, sharp and clean as shattering glass. "I'm Carol's legal counsel, Clara Reed. We have a few things to discuss." Isabel's face went pale. She looked from Clara's face to mine and back again, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish pulled from water. The mask had not just slipped, it had been incinerated, leaving behind only the raw, ugly panic of a cornered liar. I don't understand," Isabel stammered, finally finding her voice. It was thin and reedy. "Legal counsel. Carol had an episode. She's not well." "My aunt is perfectly well," Clara stated, her voice dangerously calm. "But we are very interested in your version of her episode. We're interested in your conversations with her doctor. We're interested in the locksmith you called to her home. And we're especially interested in the documents you're holding." As Clara methodically dissected Isabel's week of lies, another car engine sounded, this one more frantic. A rental car skidded to a stop behind Isabel's sedan. Stephen got out, his face pale with anxiety. He had clearly driven too fast. "Mom!" he called out, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. He saw me standing tall and composed. He saw his wife, her face a mask of crumbling terror. He saw the two strangers flanking me. He ran toward us. "Mom, are you okay? What's going on? Isabel said you were missing." Isabel saw her lifeline. "Stephen, thank God. This woman is. She's trying to manipulate your mother." "Is that so?" Clara said, her voice dripping with ice. She gestured toward the papers still clutched in Isabel's hand. "Then perhaps you can start by explaining the power of attorney you had drafted to take control of every asset she owns." Stephen stopped dead. His gaze fell to the papers in his wife's hand, then lifted to her terrified face. In that one shattering moment, the truth he had been refusing to see finally broke through. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, devastating understanding. The aftermath was quiet, not explosive. There were no more lies Isabel could tell. Frank's testimony, combined with the evidence from Clara's investigator and the damning documents in her own hand, was absolute. Legal proceedings for fraud and elder abuse were initiated. The life Isabel had so carefully constructed for herself unraveled with shocking speed. Our family was fractured, the trust between my son and me damaged by his gullibility and my necessary week of silence. There would be a long road to healing ahead of us, filled with difficult conversations and the slow, patient work of rebuilding. Later that evening, after the statements had been given and Isabel was long gone, Stephen sat with me in Frank and Mary's kitchen. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with shame. "I am so sorry." "I know," I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "We'll be okay." And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that someday we would be. Before we left, I walked back out to the edge of the clearing and looked at the abandoned station one last time. A week ago it had been a tomb, a symbol of my own terrifying vulnerability. Now I saw it differently. It was the place I had been abandoned, yes, but it was also the place where I had begun to fight back. It was the place where I was reborn. Isabel had meant for this to be a Mother's Day gift, a cruel test to dispose of me. In the end, it was a gift, just not the one she intended. It was the day I remembered the formidable woman I was, a woman who could survive the wilderness, and the far more dangerous landscape of her own family. In the end, Isabel's plan to take everything from me backfired. She thought she was testing my sanity, but she was really testing my strength, a strength I had forgotten I possessed. And that leaves one final question, the one I've thought about the most, and now I have to ask you. My son Stephen was deceived, but he was also quick to doubt me. He failed to trust his own mother. So, tell me in the comments, if you were in my shoes, could you have forgiven him completely? Comment. Forgive. If you believe that family is everything and that he deserves grace after being manipulated. Comment, prove it. If you think forgiveness has to be earned back, no matter how long it takes. I can't wait to see what you think. Thank you for following my story.